get the in mint condition like this one, it would sell for about $25,000. But back in the 1950s, young men would take cars like this and knock out the windows, chain the door, put a number on them, and they'd go stock car racing. It was the birth of automobile racing here in America. Let's take a look. Back in the 1950s, there were hundreds of little dirt tracks around the nation where you could go jalopy racing. With a $500 automobile, you could run a whole season. Oh, there were a few safety factors, but, well, you weren't really going fast enough to hurt yourself. And three-window coupes seemed to be everybody's favorite. And the crowd, well, they loved every minute of it. There were heat races, feature races, backup races, and the most exciting of them all, the figure eight. With some fancy footwork, the colorful starter would start the cars roaring into the first turn. In the figure eight, this was the most exciting part, the function junction, the crossover, where the cars met for the first time. Well, no problem this time around, but it was guaranteed to produce some fender-bender action as the race wore on. Tires, busted radiators, dented doors, everything got wrecked. But the hardest thing to repair was the driver's ego. These guys took this racing stuff seriously. Chevrolets, Plymouths, Dodges, they were all out there, and they don't make them like they used to. In this sport of hard knocks, these iron chariots were abused, beaten, and battered time and time again. The 1950s was an era of experimentation, a time when drivers and mechanics learned a little bit about engineering. All this jalopy racing brought new innovations. First came multiple carburation for more horsepower, heavy-duty parts so the engines would last longer. They began to study the chassis on the cars, learning about spring adjustments. They taught themselves how to camber and stagger the wheels. It didn't take long, and the jalopy of the 50s became the inspiration for the stock cars of the 1960s, which became the experimental cars of the 70s, which gave birth to the high-tech race cars of the 80s. It was a long line of evolution that all started when man felt the exhilaration of a car that could go just a little bit faster. Early American stock car racing has always been one of my favorites. It's really the grassroots of the sport. Another one of my favorites is open wheel cars, cars with no fenders like this Bucket T. And of course, when it comes to racing machines, open wheel means Indianapolis cars. And another one of my favorites, sprint cars. Car racing in the 1950s gave us some of the greatest drivers of all time. Many of the stars of the Indianapolis 500 were sprint car champions. A.J. Foyt, Mario Andretti, Johnny Rutherford, they all raced sprint cars. Many racing purists will tell you that sprint cars are the most dangerous form of open-wheel racing. On dirt, they're very exciting as they draw and slide through the turns. One touch of power can put you in the lead or out of the race. Late in the 1960s, strong, durable roll cages became mandatory, and a lot of lives were saved because of them. It takes a pretty gutsy guy to drive a sprint car. He has to be smooth, picking his spots as he maneuvers the car sideways, then straightening it out, and then sideways again. It's no easy task. Most of the tracks are rough, forcing drivers to manhandle their 700 horsepower racing machines, making sure that there are no mistakes. After all, mistakes are what can ruin you and your race car. Here, you see one of the worst sprint car accidents ever. The car flying, turning, and twisting in the air. But that mandatory roll cage stayed in place and saved the driver from serious injury. There's no sport quite like it. Sprint car racing separates the men from the boys. If you can cut it in this league, you're in the big time.